Hello. Yesterday I featured an example on how to play the Alabama when you are the top tier. But of course at tier 8 you're just as often about to be top tier as you're going to be the bottom tier. So in this game I'm faced up against T8, T9, T10 matchmaking, which is of course significantly different. The usual tier 10 cruisers, battleships and even some DDs of course. Pretty much the usual stuff you can expect. Now, first of all, you still want to be pushing into a fairly central position, even when you are the low tier or lower tier battleship in this case. Because, well, it's not like you as an Alabama, or well, as any real battleship, is just going to spontaneously explode or combust simply because you're pushing in close. You have, if you're going for the spec I recommend, of course, you have 5 heals, and you have a lot of health pool. And the Alabama, of course, has a fairly strong torpedo belt, so it means you can get fairly close to DDs without too many worries. But honestly, you can do this in pretty much any battleship at tier 8. Because in this case, you of course notice there's a Minotaur in front of me. Minotaur, no doubt, is probably running Hydra at this point. So getting hit by these torps undetected is highly unlikely. In fact, we can already see those torps thanks to the Hydra acoustic search being active. In general, I want to push in pretty close and pretty central. This map, of course, doesn't really support the kind of central positioning as, for example, North, mostly because there's so much land cover in the middle of the map. So instead of pushing in right into B, I instead push in between A and B, which of course allows me to shoot into B, allows me to harass the guys pushing C, and in general allows me to fight around A. So while it's not central on the map in terms of objective play, this is a very central position. Of course, when you push in close to your DDs like this, you also get the advantage of you're able to leech off their smokes, which is of course very useful in a battleship as well. Now, you don't need the smokes for survivability as much as other classes do, but the huge advantage of being in a smoke is that your shells don't get spotted when you fire. This is a huge advantage for the simple reason that it doesn't give cruisers any time to react because, well, the shells kind of pop out from nowhere and they get hit in the broadside before they can angle or maneuver or whatever, which is of course what makes it so strong. I have a Grosse Kurfürst that's surprisingly pushing in as well. This is quite rare since usually other battleships don't really tend to play that aggressively. There's a Benson in front of us, and the Fletcher was spotted here as well, so I'm not really in a hurry to push in. In fact, I quite like my current position right here. I'm very close to the capture point, but I'm not pushing into the capture point itself. I'm able to support and basically help out my team just the way I want. Worth noting is that I'm angled in towards where the DDs were last spotted to minimize the amount of dodging I have to do. And of course that there's a Fletcher on my right and there's these fighter planes in the air that allow me to see any torps coming from the right. But it's unlikely that Z-52 would push in and try to torp us since there's so much stuff around here. Oh, a torpedo does surprise me, but I make sure that I eat it on the broadside. Not on the bow, not on the stern, but smack dab in the middle of the broadside. This applies to every single battleship, not just the Alabama, who has an especially good torpedo belt, but in fact with every single battleship you should be eating it on the belt, because the torpedo belt not only reduces the damage you take, it also reduces the chance of flooding. So that's the whole point of course of torpedo protection. So if you're absolutely forced to eat a torp, make sure you eat it right in the middle of your ship. Try to avoid eating it underneath the turrets, because any torpedo that hits underneath the turrets tends to count as a sort of citadel torpedo, which of course has a fairly high chance of detonating you. When people get those torpedoes that one-shot people with the detonation, or one-shot battleships with detonation, it's always because that torpedo hit underneath the turret and of course detonated the ammo stacks, which is what causes the detonation. So if you have to eat one, eat it on the belt. Now on this ship it only did what, 7-8k damage, but even on another battleship that has less torpedo protection it would still only do about 10-11k, so the difference once again between Alabama and something else isn't really that big if we're talking about just eating one torpedo. even if I had, of course, eaten flooding, it wouldn't have been the end of the world since I had my repair. One person asked me last game, how come I didn't repair a single fire that I had ticking in that game. I multiple times probably had single fires ticking, and that's because I very, very rarely use my repair on single fires. In fact, you should never repair a single fire in a battleship. There are exceptions, of course, if you glide into a smoke or you in general feel safe, but even gliding into a smoke, I am very hesitant to do it, because if you get torped right after, then you eat the flooding you can't repair, and that's gonna pretty much eat your entire HP pool, or if you get set on fire afterwards, you won't be able to repair them. So it's safer to have your repair and not really need it than to use it on a single fire and then get killed because of it. Especially since, of course, fire is light damage, just like flooding, and you can heal 100% of the incoming damage, so there's absolutely no need to stress too much if you're eating a bit of fire damage. I still like my position. We are down though, we are down 2 ships at this point. The enemy has complete B and C control. So ultimately, we kind of want to start pushing into B at some point and capturing it. I'm not really in a hurry though. Oh, there's a Neptune in that smoke. That is very interesting. Now, some of you wondered, of course, why do I run spotter plane on the Alabama? Well, I assume people who wonder this did not watch my commentary, my Nagato ranked commentary, because the reason I run spotter planes is explicitly to counter Royal Navy cruisers. The reason, of course, I run spotter instead of fighter is because the Alabama has such good anti-air that you can get away without running fighter planes. And, well, I go over this more in depth in my Nagato ranked commentary, but I can put a link in the comments down below so you can see a more in-depth version of how to do this. But the idea with the spotter plane is that you want to target Royal Navy cruisers that are in their smokes. I used this a lot during the last ranked season because of all the Belfast and Fijis, but I use it in random battles as well. So the idea with the spotter plane is, of course, that you are able to better control your vertical aiming, because it's very hard from the flat angle to control how far in you want to be aiming, whereas when you put spotter plane and you get a more bird's eye point of view, it's easier to do it. So I wait for the Neptune to shoot. He has smoked up. I wait for him patiently to open up. There you see, I think that was him. There he is. You saw those shells. I put my crosshair on, and I make sure it's there it is, exactly on. It should be exactly on him. I try to put my crosshair between the 2 guns and make sure that he's stopped in the smoke. Yep, that's exactly where he is firing from. I put my crosshair right on where I see the shells coming from, and I finally pull the trigger. And thanks to the spotting plane, I'm able to nail him with 2 citadels in this case. And this is, of course, something that requires a certain amount of practice, but Royal Navy cruisers, especially higher tier ones, are pretty much floating citadels. So all you really need to do is hit them in the smoke, and you will pretty much be able to citadel them. I run spotter plane on Iowa, I run spotter plane on North Carolina, Alabama, Montana. These are all ships in which I pretty much hard counter Royal Navy cruisers with spotter plane because of using that method. If you want more in-depth on how to do it and how to use it, once again, I'll link the Nagato commentary below. Amagi gave me broadside. Usually you struggle to citadel Amagis at close range. I was pretty damn close, if you noticed. I was 7 km away. But of course, the Alabama, just like the North Carolina, has excellent plunging fire. The shells are very slow, but it has a lot of plunging to them, so it was able to bypass his turtleback and plunge into his citadel. I'm too close now to get any more citadels, as you noticed, but you still do great damage when you get any sort of broadside hits in. We have managed to equal the numbers a bit, and of course our Fletcher did finally push into B and secure that cap for us. In the meantime, however, we still have plenty of foes here. We still have the Neptune, there's still the battleship in the back, the Alabama, there's Friedrich der Grosse up here, and there's a Moskva. Now, an angled Moskva is actually pretty hard to deal with. You can overmatch his nose, if he does point his nose right at you. I'm more interested to see if I can finish the Neptune though with these arcing shells. And I have to turn in. Remember, you don't want to give too much broadside to Moskvas. Their AP is very, very strong, and he can quite easily citadel you if you give too much broadside. That's why I angle in. At this point, however, I am starting to slow down quite heavily, because If you anticipate my future position, if I would keep pushing right now, I would put myself into a perfect crossfire between this Friedrich de Grosse on my left and the Moskva and Alabama on my right. So I don't want to put myself into this position. Instead, I stop right here and, oh, by the way, did you notice there, if I would have shot for his nose, by turning to the left like he did, he would have bounced it using his broadside armor. That's of course what Moskvas want to do. They want to tank with their broadside armor because you can even bounce Yamato shells by using that. So instead of going for his nose, as he probably hoped I would, I instead aimed high and I aimed for his superstructure. You see, I'm aiming high again. I don't want to hit his broadside, I want to hit his superstructure and use the plunging shells to deal more damage that way. And that's how you're able to fairly consistently punish Moskvas instead of going for that, unless of course they're very close and you can guarantee you can hit them through the nose. But if they try to bounce it on their broadside, you make sure that you aim a bit high. Now I've already started reversing. As I said, I didn't want to end up in the crossfire in case something went wrong, and something did go wrong. My Grosse Kurfürst next to me died. So now I'm basically in a crossfire situation. I got a Moskva on my right and what seems like a secondary Friedrich de Grosse on my left. How do you deal with the German battleship? As any battleship? Well, first of all, most likely they will angle in like this guy does. You don't want to be shooting at the hull then. My first volley was at the hull because he gave me a broadside, but as soon as they angle like this, you don't want to shoot at the hull. You see how high I'm aiming? I'm aiming just at the edge of his armor line and more at his superstructure. That means instead of hitting his hull, where my shells would most likely bounce, my shells are instead landing on the top part of his ship and on the superstructure, which of course means that I am dealing penetrations, and that means consistent damage. So instead of him bouncing my shells, I'm in fact dealing constant damage. At this point I even dared to use my back turret. Note that I angle away as soon as I've shot my back turret. He was angled, yes, I still did 9,000 damage. As soon as I've shot, I angle again, so when his shells do arrive, they don't deal much damage at all. And this guy is pretty much dying quite quickly. Every volley I've shot at him has dealt somewhere between 9,000 and 15,000 damage. So when you do this, and of course continually reversing, a secondary German battleship isn't really that big of a threat. You just have to make sure you aim high enough to secure the penetrations. That's all there is to it. People who try to go for the hull will find their shells bouncing, and of course they will consider it overpowered, why can't I deal any damage, and so forth. But the superstructure on all battleships is always squishy. They cannot tank. It doesn't matter what ship, if it's a Yamato, Montana, Grosse Kurfürst, doesn't matter what kind of ship you're fighting, you aim for the superstructure. Moskva, angled, I aim high, just like I did earlier. If he's angled, you aim higher to make sure you get the penetrations. Okay, in this case he was actually standing still, I thought he was reversing, so my shells missed. Not the end of the world. I'm waiting for my heal to come up, I want to start pushing soon. We're still down a ship, but I've been taking it very calmly, very patiently. Unlike when I was top tier, when I pushed in and was very aggressive and very central and happily able to fight everyone. When you're the lower tier, you kind of want to deal with them one at a time. You don't want to be that guy who's right in the middle of them all. So I've taken my time, I made sure I've always remained angled against all my opponents, and I'm kind of grinding them down now one by one. I haven't been base camping, I haven't been sitting in spawn being useless or anything like that. In fact, you might notice that most of the fighting I've done has been at the objective, at A. I'm just sitting at A and helping them from here. And that's what you want to do. You don't want to, because if you sit in base, you end up getting flanked, you can't help your teammates, you can't create crossfires. There's so much use that you're missing out on if you sit in the base and try to snipe. And of course, you can't really deal damage. In this case, I've done 165,000 damage already. And as a lower tier in the tier 10, that is of course quite significant. So don't underestimate your own value and your own tankiness. As long as you stay angled in a battleship, unless you're facing a Yamato, which is like the exception because he can punch straight through your nose. But even against a Yamato, you can mitigate damage significantly just by staying angled and making him shoot your broadside instead of getting him to shoot your nose. You of course never want to point your nose right in at someone like that. Another use for the spotter plane, someone is behind an island and I want to make sure I can land the shell behind the island. So I use the spotter plane to get a bird's eye point of view. He does turn in at the very last moment, which greatly mitigates the damage he takes. And of course, Hindenburg has a fair amount of troll armor as well, so 2 bounces and 2 overpens. Unfortunate, but not really that big of a deal. This Minotaur, by the way, you might notice I only have 1 kill, and this Minotaur is basically farming kills left, right and center. That's because he's been pretty much securing every single kill that I've been shooting down, which is pretty amusing. But whatever, I'm not here for the kills, I'm here to show you how to be as effective as possible while hopefully staying alive as a lower tier battleship. I already know what this Hindenburg is. Once again, we create a crossfire. You see my Izuma is heading towards A. Because my Izuma is heading towards A, I of course head towards B. This will create a crossfire between me and the Izuma, and the Hindenburg will be impossible for him to angle against both. You often see battleships follow one after another, and that's not very good, because you, instead of creating a crossfire, you make it easy for the enemy ship to angle against you, and that's of course something I want to avoid. There should be a gap in the islands here that I can make use of. The plunging shells are of course especially useful in situations like this, because you're able to shoot over these small islands and make use of these small gaps. 5 overpens, 1 pen, didn't look like much, but I did in fact do 15,000 damage to him. So quite a powerful volley. And at this point I'm just gonna stop in fact, because the Hindenburg, the only way the Hindenburg can really take on my Uzuma body at this point is by rushing him and torping him. And the only way he can rush him, if my Uzuma slows down, is by sailing right past me here. So I'm just slowing down, and I'm gonna stop here, and I've created what I mentioned earlier, the perfect crossfire. This Hindenburg, if he rushes in, he puts himself right between us. In fact, just the terrible situation I mentioned earlier that I didn't want to put myself in between the Moskva and the enemy battleship, I forced the enemy Hindenburg into that situation. He slowed down, and the Izuma just killed him straight up through the nose, most likely. So the game ends. This time tier 8 versus tier 10. This was my first win of the day, I think. That's why I got so much XP. A nice chunk of credits, of course, since Alabama is a premium ship. Sadly, I didn't top the XP because this Minotaur, who'd been securing kills left, right and center, thanks to those kills I think he managed to beat me, since you do get an XP bonus if you do finish off the kills. Still, he played well, so nothing wrong with that. Minotaur is very good at finishing off targets, of course, because of the massive rapid rate of fire. So we did end up coming victorious, and I beat the Gearing Kurfürst division and a bunch of other high tiers. I managed to beat the main XP, which is of course always satisfying. Looking at the detailed report, we can see, well, I tanked 74,000 damage, but more important is of course my potential damage, 1.9 million. That's a lot of damage to eat when you are the low tier. And looking at the damage I've dealt, you can see Friedrich Grosse 42k, Amagi 47k, Neptune 37k, Moskva 29k. And looking at around, you can see I've been dealing damage to a ton of targets, and the entire time there wasn't really too much movement, was there? I chose a good strategic position on A, and I slowly advanced or reversed depending on how the situation changed. When their DDs were killed or pushed off, I advanced. When it looked like my Grosse Kurfürst was about to die and I might end up in a crossfire, I reversed. And that's the kind of situational awareness you want to keep up. Whenever the battle flows in your favor, you can help and push and back up your teammates, and when it looks like it's turning the other way, you can just take a chill pill, slow down, see what's going on. If it looks like it's turning the wrong way, just start calmly reversing. The world won't end just because you're reversing in your battleship, and sometimes it is in fact the best possible option, because Alabama, like many battleships of course, they eat very reduced damage as long as you remain angled. So you want to make sure that you are in a position where you can angle against the incoming fire, because as soon as you put yourself into a position where they get free broadside shots, you're going to be sinking very quickly. Anyway, since this is the second part, I figured, and I had a lot of requests for the build, I am using of course my Montana Captain, but I might as well rehash the build once more since a lot of people have been requesting to see it. Starting off, of course, modules as usual, nothing worth changing here. You get priority damage control, since it reduces the cooldown a lot, and you get premium damage control and premium heal. This is a premium ship, so you should be able to afford these costs easy. You can change between the cost by clicking this little arrow here, so you're not paying for it with doubloons, but you're paying for it with credits, which of course you will be earning shit tons of if you play enough Alabama. Finally, I run premium spotting aircraft, but you can run the default one if you want. I just do it because I have more money than I can spend. Upgrade wise, main armaments mod 1, AA gun range 2. Of course, we want our AA to be able to reach that massive 7.2 km, and most importantly of all, we want our short and mid range to actually be useful. So that's why we run the AA range. Damage control system mod 1 increases your already good torpedo protection. Rudder shift, because once again we are running a stealth build, so if we do get focused by a lot of fire and such, we can just disappear into stealth and heal and repair up there. So it's more important that we are actually able to maneuver and dodge torpedoes as they come, instead of running the damage control. And finally, of course, concealment system to fit into our stealth build that we run. This is a very common build I run on most of my US battleships. In fact, I probably run exactly the same thing on Montana, with the difference being I run the reduced dispersion module as well. Captain perks. This is my Montana and Missouri captain, worth noting. First of all, preventive maintenance. You do lose turrets, especially if you're shooting at targets to your left or right. The double spotter plane is an option, but since I run this on my Missouri as well, this perk would be completely useless. So you can run direction center as well. It's not a bad choice. Either one of these is good. Personally, I prefer this one because, of course, Missouri doesn't have any planes, so the direction center perk would be wasted. Second perk, well, on this ship, I would probably go for expert marksman first and get adrenaline rage later, or rush later, because the turret traverse is pretty slow. You can skip it though and get adrenaline rush sooner as well. That's okay. The turret traverse isn't that awful, but this does significantly help. Superintendent as next priority, followed by concealment expert. At this point, it's kind of up to you. I personally prefer getting AFT fairly quickly because you want to be able to have some additional AA buff, and you want to be able to make use of the great anti-air that US battleships have. So this plus the AA mod, of course, gives you really good anti-air, which is one of the goals of playing US battleships. Finally, vigilance. Just because you have a good torpedo belt doesn't mean you don't want to see them coming in advance, because if you do end up flooding and you have to repair it and you get set on fire, having a good torpedo belt won't help you at all. So you still want vigilance on all US battleships. And the last 2 points, in case you didn't get it, get adrenaline rush now, because of course having almost 20% increased reload when you're low HP is insanely useful. Anyway, that was my US battleship captain and my second part of the Alabama commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it.